Hey guys, tonight we are packing our bags not for a weekend getaway, but for one of the most ridiculously extravagant road trips in history. We're heading back to the 14th century to the heart of West Africa, where you've just landed a temporary job in the court of a man so wealthy, he makes today's billionaires look like they're clipping coupons. Seriously, your new boss could accidentally break an entire country's economy just by being generous. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel more than you know. And as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from, so drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always a quiet thrill to see this little community scattered across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you isn't the wealth, it's the heat. A heavy, dry heat that presses down on you, shimmering above the baked earth of Niamey, the capital of the Mali Empire. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, of unfamiliar spices being ground in stone mortars, and the sweet, dusty smell of the Sahara itself. This is your new home, for now. You're a long way from anywhere you've ever known. A minor functionary, perhaps a record keeper or a translator's assistant, newly arrived and trying desperately to look like you belong. Your eyes are still adjusting to the sheer brilliance of it all. Not just the sun, but the gold. It's not hoarded in a vault here, it's what? The Emperor's guards have gold inlaid hilts on their swords. Important officials have fine threads of it woven into their cotton tunics. It glints from earrings, from bracelets, from the elaborate ornaments braided into the hair of courtly women. It's so commonplace among the elite that it almost feels normal. This is the first lesson you learn in the Mali Empire. Gold is not just currency. It is a statement, a language, the very fabric of power. And at the center of this universe is your new employer, Mansa Musa. You see him for the first time holding court. He isn't sitting on a throne of solid gold as you might have imagined. That would be too obvious to crude. Instead, he reclines on a raised platform carpeted with rich silks, leaning against a large cushion. He is a commanding presence, broad-shouldered and calm, his face thoughtful. He holds a simple, polished wooden staff, but beside him, his attendants hold aloft massive parasols of silk and the symbols of his authority, lances and swords, all gleaming with gold. The real show of power isn't in what he has, but in how people approach him. You watch as a regional governor, a man who himself commands thousands of soldiers, enters the audience chamber. He doesn't walk, he prostrates himself. He lies flat on the ground, and then in a gesture of ultimate submission, he scoops up handfuls of dust and sprinkles it over his own head and back. This practice, known as dusting, is the required etiquette for anyone addressing the Mansa. It's a stark, visceral reminder of who is in charge. The emperor is the land, and to approach him, you must cover yourself in it. You make a mental note, practice your dusting technique. You don't want to mess that up. This empire, you quickly learn, sits on a literal gold mine. Or rather, several of them. The lands of Bambukai and Bor, deep within the empire's control, are the source of what seems like an endless river of gold. This is the mainstream knowledge that everyone here understands. The Mansa holds a royal monopoly on all gold nuggets found. They are his by right. The common folk trade in gold dust, measured out with delicate scales. This control over the source and flow of West Africa's most precious commodity is the bedrock of the empires and the man's staggering wealth. But how much wealth are we actually talking about? That's a question even the most seasoned merchants in the market can't answer, and it's a point that historians are still debating to this day. Chroniclers from faraway lands would later try to put a number to it, but the figures are so astronomical they seem like fantasy. How do you quantify the fortune of a man who controls the source of a resource that the rest of the world desires so desperately? It's like trying to price the sun. Scholars still argue whether the contemporary accounts were literal truth or legendary embellishments meant to convey a sense of awe. The truth is, his wealth was likely beyond calculation in modern terms. For now, you are just a small part of this grand machine. You watch Mansa Musa listen to petitioners, dispense justice, and confer with his advisors. His gaze is often distant, as if he is looking past the walls of his audience hall, past the city of Nianai, towards a far horizon. There's a quiet intensity about him, a sense that he is contemplating something far greater than the day-to-day administration of his golden empire. A plan is brewing, a magnificent, world-altering idea. You don't know what it is yet, but you can feel the shift in the air, a gathering of energy around this one man. Your quiet life as a court functionary is about to change. That feeling of anticipation you had, that sense of a great plan taking shape, doesn't just fade away. It crystallizes. It starts as whispers in the corridors, a hushed energy among the senior officials you try to avoid making eye contact with. You hear a new word repeated in conversations you're not meant to overhear: Mecca. Then more words follow: pilgrimage, caravan, the great desert. At first, you dismiss it. A journey of that magnitude seems impossible, a flight of fancy for a king who has everything. It would be a logistical nightmare, a journey of thousands of miles across the most inhospitable terrain on earth. But the whispers grow louder. They turn into discussions. Discussions turn into commands. One day, you see vast, rolled-up parchments being brought into the man's private chamber's maps. You realize, showing a route that stretches from this very city, eastward, across the entirety of the Sahara. The truth settles in not with a grand announcement, but with a slow dawning and slightly terrifying realization: Mansa Musa is actually going to do it. He is going to undertake the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca. This isn't just a royal vacation. For a Muslim, the Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a holy duty to be performed at least once in a lifetime if one has the means. And oh, does Mansa Musa have the means? But the decision sends a shockwave through the court. It's one thing to be the master of a self-contained, fabulously wealthy empire. It's another thing entirely to move a significant portion of that empire's administration and wealth across the known world. The royal treasurer looks permanently stressed. The captain of the guard is already drawing up patrol rosters that seem to defy the very limits of human endurance. And you're just trying to figure out if your job description includes desert survival expert. So, why now? Why embark on such a perilous, colossally expensive journey? The official reason is, of course, piety. The Mansa is a devout Muslim, and he wishes to fulfill his sacred duty to God. This is the mainstream historical reason, and it is undoubtedly true. His faith was a core part of his identity and his rule. But as you listen to the more seasoned members of the court, the old men who have seen decades of palace intrigue, you hear a more personal, more tragic story. This nugget of information isn't common knowledge, a piece of gossip shared only in trusted circles. It's said that the pilgrimage is not just an act of faith, but an act of penance. Years ago, in a story shrouded in family tragedy, the Mansa was said to have accidentally caused the death of his own mother, Nana Kankayan. The details are vague and sorrowful. Some say it was an accident during a heated moment, a tragic misstep. For this, the legends say, he felt a profound and unshakable guilt. He consulted religious scholars who advised him that only a great act of devotion, a journey to the holiest city of Islam, could begin to expiate such a sin in the eyes of God. This pilgrimage, then, is born not just from power and wealth, but from a deeply wounded heart. It's a quest for forgiveness. Of course, not everyone is convinced it's that simple, and this is where historians still debate the man's true genius. Was this journey driven solely by faith and guilt? Or was it also a calculated act of statecraft, a piece of political theater on a global scale? The Mali Empire, for all its wealth, was largely a mystery to the wider Islamic and European worlds. It was a name on the hazy edges of the map, a land of rumored gold. What better way to announce your arrival on the world stage than to literally march across it, showcasing a level of wealth that would leave cities like Cairo and Mecca speechless? Was this a pilgrimage, or was it the most audacious branding exercise in history? Scholars argue over whether he was primarily a penitent or a promoter, a pious man, or a pragmatist. The most likely answer is that he was brilliantly both. The planning begins in earnest, and the scale is staggering. It's not just the Mansa going. He will be accompanied by his senior wife, Enori Kunate, and a vast retinue. The numbers being discussed sound like pure fantasy. Thousands of soldiers for protection, thousands of civilians and royal attendants to see to the court's every need. Doctors, cooks, musicians, and scholars. And then there are the slaves, an integral but often overlooked part of these historical movements, who would carry the heavy burdens. You see the quartermasters, their faces tight with concentration, drawing up endless lists. How much water for a month in the desert? How many camels are needed to carry the food? How do you transport enough tents, cooking pots, and luxury goods to maintain a royal lifestyle in the middle of nowhere? The logistics are mind-boggling. Your small role in this, perhaps cross-referencing lists of grain suppliers or counting bolts of silk, suddenly feels like you're e-cataloging the inventory for an invasion, not a pilgrimage. The air in Nianai is no longer just hot. It's electric with a frantic, purposeful energy. The journey is no longer a rumor. It is an approaching reality as vast and inevitable as the desert itself. The city of Nianai transforms into a vast, chaotic, and incredibly organized staging ground. The frantic energy you felt before has now settled into a rhythm of relentless preparation. If you thought the planning was abstract, the reality of packing is something you can see, hear, and smell every single day. The sound of hammers echoes from dawn till dusk as carpenters reinforce grates and repair wagons. The air is filled with the bleating of goats, the grunting of camels, and the shouts of men trying to herd them into designated pens. Your job, whatever it might be, places you right in the middle of this organized chaos. You might be tasked with counting and recording supplies, a job that sounds simple until you realize the sheer volume. Imagine a warehouse, and then imagine that warehouse stretching for a city block. You're tallying up sacks of militant rice, dried meats, and mountains of couscous. You tick off lists of water skins, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of them, dirt and leather scent mingling with the dust. It's a city's worth of food and water, all being prepared for a journey into the void. But this isn't just about survival. This is a royal procession, and it has to look the part. You see officials inspecting enormous bolts of the finest silk brocade, some from as far away as China, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the earthen tones of the city. You watch as craftsmen carefully pack ceremonial robes, intricate jewelry, and all the finery required for a king to hold court, even in a tent in the middle of the desert. This is where the sheer audacity of Mansa Musa's vision becomes tangible. He isn't just going to Mecca. He is taking his entire court with him. And then there's the gold. The stories you heard were not exaggerations. You witness it with your own eyes. The emperor's personal slaves and servants, a procession of thousands, are being outfitted. Each one is designated to carry a staff of pure, polished gold. You see them practicing, walking in formation, the afternoon sun glinting off the precious metal until the training grounds look like a field of shimmering light. The sight is so stunning, so profoundly ostentatious, that it's almost comical. The mainstream knowledge repeated by every chronicler who would later write about this event is the incredible number of camels dedicated solely to carrying gold. The figure that has echoed through history is 100 camels, each one loaded with around 300 pounds of gold dust. That's 30,000 pounds of gold. You try to picture it, to conceptualize that amount of wealth, and your mind simply can't grasp it. It's an abstract number, a legend. But then you see it. You walk past the heavily guarded storehouses where the gold is being packed into leather pouches and loaded onto specially selected camels. The animals grunt under the immense weight. This isn't a story. It's real. The empire is literally packing its treasury to take on a road trip. In the midst of all this grandeur, you stumble upon a more peculiar, and frankly, more practical aspect of the preparations. This is a little-known detail, a piece of logistical genius that highlights the meticulous planning involved. As you pass by a group of men digging in a specially designated area, you learn an odd fact. The caravan plans to build a mosque every single Friday, wherever they happen to stop for the day of prayer. This isn't just a spiritual goal, it's a construction project. A team is being assembled specifically for this purpose with materials and tools packed and ready. The plan is to leave a trail of new mosques all the way from Nianai to Cairo. It's a beautiful symbol of faith. But from your perspective, it also seems like an unbelievable amount of extra work. The question of just how many people were in this caravan is a source of endless debate among historians. The most famous account from the scholar Al-Umari, who visited Cairo years later, puts the number at a staggering 60,000 people. This included 12,000 personal attendants and slaves of the Mansa, a 500-strong vanguard of slaves who carried the gold staffs, plus soldiers, officials, merchants, camel drivers, and all their families. Many modern historians question this number. Could an entourage of 60,000 people truly cross the Sahara? The logistical challenges of providing food and water for that many souls would be almost insurmountable. They argue the number might have been an exaggeration, a way to express a crowd so large it was beyond easy counting. Perhaps the number was closer to 15,000 or 20,000, still a monumental figure, but one more grounded in the harsh realities of desert travel. The exact figure is lost to time, but as you stand there, watching the endless river of people and animals assembling, 60,000 doesn't feel like an exaggeration at all. It feels like your new reality. You see your own small bag of essentials, a spare tunic, a water flask, some dried dates, and it feels laughably insignificant. You are a single drop of water in an ocean of people, gold, and ambition, about to be swept across the continent on a tide of faith and fortune. The day of departure is near. The air is thick with a mixture of excitement and a deep, collective anxiety. The desert awaits. The day finally arrives. There is no single moment of departure, no grand trumpet blast that signals the beginning. Instead, it's like watching a tide slowly begin to turn. The assembly, which took weeks, begins to unravel in a long, slow-moving stream. From your vantage point, perhaps on a small rise just outside Nianai, the sight is one you know you will never forget. It's not a caravan, it's a city on the move. A golden, silken, living river flowing out into the vast, dusty plains. The vanguard leads the way. You see them first, the 500 attendants, dressed in fine Persian silk, each holding their staff of pure gold. The morning sun catches the metal, and they move like a ripple of light, a promise of the wealth that follows. They are the official announcers of the man's is coming, a wave of opulence sent ahead to prepare the way. Behind them, the main body of the procession begins to move, a sprawling mass of humanity and livestock that kicks up a cloud of ochre dust so vast it seems to create its own weather system. You find your place within the immense column. The sheer noise is overwhelming at first. It's a symphony of 1,000 different sounds, the low groaning of the camels, the braying of donkeys, the rhythmic clatter of pots and pans tied to pack animals, the murmur of tens of thousands of voices, speaking in a dozen different dialects, and overlaying it all, the music. The Mansa has brought his musicians, his griots, and their melodies, played on the Koran, the Biel Afan, drift through the air, a strangely joyful soundtrack for this arduous undertaking. As you walk, you get a sense of the caravan's internal structure. It's not just a mob. It's a mobile society with a clear hierarchy. The Mansa and his immediate court, including his senior wife and Ari Kunate, are at the heart of the procession. They travel in relative comfort, shaded by the massive silk parasols you saw back in the capital. Some even carried an ornate halaknunes. Surrounding them are the senior officials and their retinues, then the vast military escort, their spears and leather shields a stark contrast to the finery of the court. Then come the merchants, the artisans, the doctors, and people like you, the functionaries, the support staff, the cogs in this massive machine. Finally, the rear is brought up by the endless train of pack animals and the herders who manage them. The mainstream understanding of this journey often focuses on the gold, but as you move with the caravan, you realize the true currency of the next few months will be water. The logistics of keeping this moving city hydrated are a constant, visible effort. You see the water bearers, their muscles straining as they manage the sloshing water skins. Every stop at a well or an oasis is a carefully managed, high-stakes operation. As the sun climbs higher, the reality of the journey begins to bite. The initial excitement gives way to the monotony of walking. Dust gets into everything: your clothes, your food, your throat. You learn to tie a cloth over your face, just like the seasoned desert travelers. You see the sheer scale of the operation in the small details, the mobile kitchens that are set up every evening, producing vast quantities of food. the waste that such a large group produces and the designated teams tasked with managing it to keep the camps clean and prevent disease. Here, you learn a strange and little-known fact about the social dynamics of the caravan. While Mansa Musa was a devout Muslim, his empire was a mix of many faiths and traditions. The court had adopted Islam, but many of the common soldiers and people in the caravan still held to older, animist beliefs. You see it in the small amulets some of them wear, trinkets meant to ward off desert spirits or bring good fortune. There's a quiet coexistence of belief systems on the road. The official purpose is an Islamic pilgrimage, but for many it's also a journey into a spiritual landscape populated by DJs and ancient forces. This brings up a point that historians sometimes debate: how Islamic was the Mali Empire at this point? While the ruling class in urban centers had converted, how deeply had the faith penetrated the rural and military populations? Some scholars argue that the adoption of Islam was, for many, a layer added on top of existing traditional beliefs, rather than a complete replacement. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage can be seen not just as a personal act of faith, but as a massive public project to further cement Islam as the central, unifying religion of his diverse empire. He was just going to Mecca. He was bringing the idea of Mecca back with him, in a way that would be impossible to ignore. As the first day draws to a close, you look back. The capital, Niamey, is gone, vanished behind the horizon. Ahead lies nothing but the scrubland that will soon give way to true desert. The caravan begins to halt, the different sections peeling off to make camp for the night. Thousands of tents begin to spring up, creating a temporary city under the stars. The smell of cooking fires fills the air. The music of the griots becomes softer, more melancholic. You are no longer in the Mali Empire. You are the Mali Empire, a nation on a pilgrimage, a river of gold and humanity flowing slowly but inexorably east. The scrubland has vanished. What lies before you now is the Sahara. It's not just a sea of sand dunes, as you might have imagined. It's a vast, harsh, and varied landscape of packed earth, rocky plateaus, and gravel plains that stretch to a horizon that seems impossibly distant. The sun is no longer just a source of light and warmth. It is a relentless, oppressive force. This is where the journey truly begins. Your daily routine becomes brutally simple. You wake before dawn in the bone-chilling cold of the desert night. You eat a quick, sparse meal, a piece of flatbread, some dried dates, and drink your carefully rationed water. Then you walk. You walk as the sun rises, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. You walk as it climbs to its zenith, beating down with a white-hot intensity that drains your strength. You learn to find a rhythm, to shut down parts of your mind and focus only on the heels of the person in front of you. The immensity of the caravan, which felt so grand before, now feels like a necessity for survival. To be lost out here would be a death sentence. The group is a moving island of life in an ocean of nothingness. The mainstream historical accounts of Saharan travel always emphasize the role of tour guides, the legendary blue men of the desert, and they are here. You see them tall and silent, their faces wrapped in indigo veils that stain their skin. They don't walk with the main body of the caravan. They scout ahead, fan out to the sides, their knowledge of this treacherous landscape the invisible thread that guides you all. They know the location of every hidden well, every meager patch of grazing. The entire golden city is utterly dependent on these few, quiet men. At night, the camp is a circle of fragile light and life against an overwhelming darkness. The sky is a revelation. With no competing light, the stars are brilliant, cold diamonds scattered across black velvet. You've never seen a sky so vast or so clear. But the desert night is not silent. You hear the camels murmuring, the restless shifting of thousands of sleeping people, and the lonely sound of the wind sweeping across the sands. It's during one of these long, monotonous days that you learn a fascinating and bizarre piece of survival trivia, a trick of the trade for Saharan caravans. Water is everything, but what happens when a water skin leaks, or a well is drier than expected? The answer is both grim and ingenious: the sand stomach. You hear a story from a seasoned camel driver about a past journey where they ran desperately low on water. As a last resort, they would slaughter a camel, but they weren't just after the meat. Inside the camel's stomach, they would find semi-digested, moist plant matter. By squeezing this pulp, They could extract a greenish, foul-tasting but life-saving liquid. The knowledge is unsettling, but it's a stark reminder of the brutal calculus of desert survival. You look at the lumbering camels with a newfound, slightly nervous respect. They are not just beasts of burden, they are emergency canteens. The journey is a constant battle against dehydration and exhaustion, but it also presents other, more subtle dangers. The risk of getting lost, of sandstorms, of resource scarcity, these are well known. But what about the health of the caravan itself? This is a point of academic curiosity. How did a group of this size manage sanitation and prevent the rapid spread of disease? Historians speculate about the sophisticated organization required. There must have been designated latrine areas, strict rules about waste disposal, and a team of physicians who were not just tending to the manse, but also monitoring the public health of the entire mobile city. The construction of a new mosque every Friday, which seemed like a purely spiritual act, may have also had a practical side effect. It forced a regular, structured halt, allowing for rest, recuperation, and a thorough cleaning of the camp. Was this an intentional public health strategy woven into a religious observance? It's a question scholars ponder. As direct evidence is scarce, you witness the first real test of the caravan's resolve. Base, Gunstorm. It doesn't appear suddenly. It's a smudge on the horizon that grows with terrifying speed into a churning wall of yellow dust. The guides shout commands. The caravan halts. People huddle together, covering their faces. The camels, with their innate desert sense, lie down, tucking their heads low. The world dissolves into a roaring, blinding chaos. The wind howls and the sand scours every inch of exposed skin. It feels like the world is ending. And then, just as it began, it passes. You emerge coughing, blinking, covered in a fine layer of dust, into a world that is eerily still. The sky is hazy. The landscape has been subtly reshaped. A quick accounting is made. Everyone is safe, though some supplies have been lost. The caravan, slowly, shakily, gets back to its feet and begins to move again. You have survived your first encounter with the Sahara's fury. It's a sobering experience that bonds you to the people around you. You are no longer just individuals. You are survivors, a collective entity pushing forward against the vast, unforgiving emptiness. Weeks of relentless, monotonous desert have passed. The landscape has become a hypnotic blur of rock and sand. Your world has shrunk to the rhythm of your own footsteps and the immediate needs of survival. Then one day, a different kind of murmur ripples through the caravan. A word is passed from the scouts at the front back through the lines tag Haza. The name means little to you at first, but to the veteran merchants and guides, it's a major milestone. You are approaching one of the great salt mines of the Sahara. As you get closer, you see it. It's not a lush, green oasis, the paradise you might have been dreaming of. Instead, it's a settlement that seems to be carved out of the very salt it mines. The buildings, you realize with a jolt, are constructed from massive blocks of salt, grayish-white and glistening in the sun. The roofs are made of camel hides. It's a surreal, almost ghostly place inhabited by slaves of the Tuar, who toil in the mines under the brutal sun. The only vegetation is a few scraggly, salt-tolerant bushes. The air tastes of salt, and the ground crunches under your feet. This is a major trading hub, a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. Your massive caravan descends upon it like a conquering army, but a peaceful one. The camp is made a short distance from the settlement itself, and immediately the place comes alive. The arrival of the Mansa's procession is the biggest event this remote outpost has seen in decades, maybe ever. Merchants from your caravan, who have been patiently biding their time, now open their packs. The Twa traders who control the salt trade emerge from the settlement to do business. You are about to witness one of the foundational economic principles of the ancient world in action, the salt for gold trade. This is a well-documented historical fact. In many parts of Africa, salt was an incredibly precious commodity, essential for preserving food and for life itself in the hot climate. In regions south of the Sahara, its value was so high that it was literally traded for its weight in gold. Here, in the heart of the desert, you see the opposite end of that transaction. The Mansa's caravan is overflowing with gold, but has a desperate need for fresh supplies and, more importantly, for the salt that will be a valuable trade good further down the line. You watch the transactions fascinated. A Malian merchant from your caravan carefully measures out a small amount of gold dust onto a delicate scale. In return, a Twa trader EFTs a huge, rough-hewn slab of salt. The exchange seems ludicrous to you, a pile of rock for a pile of precious metal, but here, it makes perfect sense. This is the engine that has driven trans-Saharan trade for centuries. While wandering through the temporary market that has sprung up, you encounter a truly bizarre local delicacy, a piece of culinary trivia that speaks volumes about life in this harsh environment. You see some of the miners eating what looks like dried meat, but you learn it's something else entirely. It's lizard jerky. The desert is home to large, tough lizards, and in a place with virtually no other fresh protein, they are a vital food source. The lizards are hunted, gutted, salted heavily, and dried in the sun until they are as hard as wood. It's a food born of absolute necessity, and a stark reminder of the resourcefulness required to survive in the Sahara. You politely decline a piece when offered. The arrival at Tag Haza also brings the first real contact with people outside your immediate bubble. You hear stories, news from other caravans that have passed through weeks or months ago. You learn about tribal politics in the deep desert, about which routes are safe and which are now troubled by bandits. But this exchange also raises an interesting academic question. How was long-distance trade like this actually managed? Was it a simple barter system as it appears on the surface, or were there more complex financial instruments at play? Some historians argue that for large-scale trade, sophisticated systems of credit must have existed. A merchant might not swap goods directly, but would trade on a promise, a form of medieval IOU guaranteed by a powerful tribal leader or a wealthy trading family. The reputation of the people involved was paramount. They debate whether the exchanges you're seeing are the full story, or just the cash on delivery tip of a much larger iceberg of credit and trust networks that span the entire desert. Your stay in Tag Haza is a brief but vital respite. It's a chance to replenish water, to trade for supplies, and to feel, for a moment, connected to the wider world again. The Mansa, ever generous, distributes gold to the local Twa leaders as a sign of respect and to ensure safe passage through their lands. He also purchases vast quantities of salt, not just for the caravan's use, but as another form of currency to carry with him. Soon it's time to move on. The caravan reassembles, now heavier with salt and lighter on gold. As you leave the ghostly white city behind, you have a new appreciation for the complexities of this journey. It's not just a pilgrimage, it's a massive commercial enterprise, and you have a new appreciation for the simple things. The next time you taste salt in your food, you'll remember the city made of it, and the hard, sun-baked lives of the people who pull it from the earth in the middle of the world's greatest desert. Leaving Tag Haza, you feel a subtle shift in the caravan's mood. The stopover broke the monotony, but now you are plunging back into an even more desolate and challenging stretch of the Sahara. The days blend into a grueling rhythm of walking, the sun a relentless hammer. The nights are cold and silent. To combat the crushing boredom and fatigue, the social fabric of the caravan becomes more important than ever. This is where the griots truly come into their own. Back in Mianai, they were court musicians and oral historians. Here, in the vast emptiness of the desert, they are the glue that holds the caravan's morale together. This is a key historical role in West African societies that is often misunderstood. They are not just entertainers. A griot is a living library, a repository of genealogies, stories, and songs that define the identity of the people. Every evening, as the camp settles, you see small crowds gathering around them. The griot plucks his kora, a 21-stringed harp lute, its delicate notes seeming to hang in the dry desert air. And then he begins to sing. He sings the epic of Sundiata Keita, the legendary founder of the Mali Empire, a story of a crippled boy who rose to become a great warrior and king. The story is familiar to everyone, from the highest official to the lowliest camel driver. It's their Star Wars, their Lord of the Rings, a foundational myth that binds them all together. Hearing it here under a canopy of brilliant stars, it feels less like a performance and more like a prayer, a reminder of who they are and the legacy they carry. You listen to the gossip and idle chatter that passes between people as they mend their sandals or share a small meal. The conversations are a mix of the profound and the mundane. People worry about their families back home. They complain about the quality of the dried meat. They place small wagers on how many days it will take to reach the next well. You hear merchants quietly discussing the price of gold in Cairo, their voices filled with anticipation. In this moving city, you learn a strange and amusing piece of social trivia. Given this strict hierarchy, how does one complain about a superior without getting into trouble? The answer lies in proverbs and indirect storytelling. You might overhear one person say to another, "Even the strongest bull can be tormented by a small fly," while glancing meaningfully at a particularly officious caravan official. It's a way of venting frustration and offering social commentary in a coded language that provides plausible deniability. It's a subtle art form, a way of maintaining social harmony while still acknowledging the daily frictions of life on the road. The journey is not without its perils. One evening, a panic ripples through a section of the camp. A child is wandered off. The sun is setting, and the desert at night is no place for a lost child. The caravan security force, the professional soldiers, immediately spring into action. They form search parties, their torches creating moving patterns of light in the dusk. The entire camp seems to hold its breath. It's a stark reminder of the constant, ambient danger that surrounds you. The child is found, safe, asleep behind a large rock, but the incident leaves a sobering pall over the evening. This constant presence of a large military escort raises a question that historians have debated: who was the primary threat they were protecting against. The most obvious answer is bandits or rivaled war clans who might be tempted by the caravan's immense wealth. The Sahara has always been a place where the line between trader and raider can be thin, but some scholars suggest another possibility. Was the army also there for internal security? Managing a city of tens of thousands of people is a monumental task. Disputes over resources, personal rivalries, and the sheer psychological stress of the journey could easily boil over into conflict. The army might have spent as much time policing the caravan itself as it did watching the horizon for external enemies. The exact nature of their duties, part bodyguard, part police force, is a matter of academic speculation. As the weeks wear on, you see the toll the journey is taking. People are thinner, their robes are more frayed, their faces odd into the color of leather. Yet, there is a resilience, a toughness that has been forged in the crucible of the desert. They are no longer the courtiers and city dwellers who left neon eye. They are veterans of the Sahara. One evening, a scout rides back into camp, his face etched with exhaustion but also with triumph. He brings news. They have sighted it. A line of green on the far horizon. A different kind of air, a faint, almost imperceptible hint of moisture. After months in the desolate heart of the desert, you are approaching the life-giving artery of northeast Africa. You are nearing the Nile. The end of the desert is in sight. A wave of relief and renewed energy washes over the entire caravan. The quiet songs that night are not of past glories, but of a promised land just a few more days' journey away. The news of the Nile electrifies the caravan, but the desert does not yield its grip easily. It takes several more days of hard marching with the promise of green as your only comfort. And then you're there. The transition is so abrupt it feels like a dream. One moment you are placing your foot on dry, cracked earth. The next, the air changes. It becomes softer, heavier with a humidity you haven't felt in months. You can smell it before you see it, the scent of damp earth, of living things, of water. You crest a final sandy ridge and the Sahara ends. Below you, snaking through the landscape, is a ribbon of impossible, vibrant green. The Nile Valley. After a world defined by a palette of brown, ochre, and gray, the sheer intensity of the color is a physical shock. It's a lifeline, a testament to the power of the river. The caravan lets out a collective sigh. The sound of thousands of people releasing a tension they didn't even know they were holding. As you descend into the valley, you re-enter the world of settled civilization. Small villages dot the riverbank, their mud brick houses a familiar sight, yet utterly alien after the tents of the desert. Local farmers working their fields with oxen stop and stare in disbelief at the procession that has emerged from the wastelands. Their faces are a mixture of awe, fear, and pure, unadulterated curiosity. Who are these dusty, sun-scorched people, dressed in strange clothes, but accompanied by an army and shimmering with gold? You feel their eyes on you, and for the first time, you become aware of just how strange your moving city must look to an outsider. The mainstream knowledge here is simply the lifeblood of Egypt itself, the annual flood. Everything is dictated by the river. You see the intricate network of irrigation canals that crisscross the fields, a system perfected over thousands of years. The land is incredibly fertile, a stark contrast to the barren lands of the Sahara you left behind. The power and wealth of the pharaohs, and now the Mamluk sultans who rule this land, was built on their ability to harness this river. It's here that one of your caravan's guides, a man who has made this journey before, points out a peculiar structure on the riverbank. It's a stone tower, or sometimes a staircase leading down into the water with markings carved into its walls. He calls it a nilometer. This, he explains, is one of the most important pieces of technology in Egypt. It's not for telling time or studying the stars. Its sole purpose is to measure the height of the Nile's annual flood. This is the fascinating, lesser-known piece of the puzzle. The measurement was just for agricultural planning. It was the basis of the entire Egyptian tax code. If the flood was high, the harvest would be bountiful and the sultan's taxes would be high. If the flood was low, the harvest would be poor and taxes would be lowered to prevent famine and unrest. It was a sophisticated, data-driven system of governance. Power here was just about gold. It was about information and the bureaucratic control it enabled. Watching the meticulous management of the Nile raises a compelling question that historians still debate: how much did Mansa Musa know about Egypt before he arrived? It's easy to imagine him as a wide-eyed provincial king, emerging from the unknown parts of Africa, about to be stunned by the sophistication of Cairo. But the Mali Empire was not an isolated state. It was a hub of trans-Saharan trade, and its capital was home to scholars and merchants who had traveled the Islamic world. Did they not have books and maps describing the Mamluk Sultanate? Did the Mansa not receive detailed briefings from his advisors about the political structure, the economy, and the customs of the mighty empire he was about to enter? Some scholars argue that Musa was far from naive. They believe this journey was as much a diplomatic and intelligence-gathering mission as it was a pilgrimage. He was just a pilgrim. He was a rival monarch on a state visit, carefully observing the strengths and weaknesses of the other great power in the region. His later actions in Cairo, which on the surface seem like simple matters of etiquette, might have been calculated moves in a complex diplomatic game. Was his arrival a collision of two separate worlds, or the carefully managed meeting of two rulers who already knew a great deal about each other? We can't know for sure. But the idea that he was playing a far more strategic game is a tantalizing one. For now, you are just relieved to be walking on soft earth again. The caravan moves slowly along the riverbank, a spectacle for every village it passes. The anticipation builds with every mile. You are no longer marching towards an abstract destination. You are in the hinterlands of a great civilization, on the road to its heart. The talk in the caravan is no longer about survival, but about what you will see in the city that lies ahead, the greatest city in the Islamic world, a metropolis of legendary size and splendor, Cairo. The journey along the Nile is a strange, dreamlike transition. After the silence of the desert, you are now surrounded by the sounds of civilization, the chatter of villagers, the lowing of cattle, the creak of water wheels. The air is thick with new smells of cooking fires that burn different woods, of river fish in damp earth. Every day, the signs of a powerful, organized state become more apparent. You pass by small garrisons of Mamluk soldiers, their armor and banners starkly different from your own armies. You see tax collectors making their rounds, their scribes recording everything on papyrus scrolls. This is a land of ancient bureaucracy, and then you see it. It starts as a smudge on the horizon, a thickening of the air that resolves itself not into a mountain, but into a jagged line of rooftops, minarets, and the colossal, imposing form of a citadel. It is Cairo, Al-Qahira, the victorious. Even from a distance, it is overwhelming. Niamey was a large and prosperous city, but this is a different order of magnitude entirely. It looks less like a city and more like a geological feature, a mountain range of human creation. The caravan halts a few miles outside the city gates, in the plains that serve as a traditional camping ground for visiting armies and large caravans. This is a calculated move, allowing for preparations and for the formal diplomatic channels to be opened. The vanguard of 500 with their golden staffs is sent ahead to announce the Mansa's arrival to the Mamluk Sultan, Al-Nasir Muhammad. The reaction from Cairo is immediate and electric. The news of a king from the deep south leading an army-sized pilgrimage and carrying an apparently inexhaustible supply of gold is the most sensational story to hit the city in years. You can see the curious from Cairo trickling out, trying to get a glimpse of your king. They are a kaleidoscope of new faces and new fashions. Men in fine linen robes under elaborate turbans. Women with their faces veiled, merchants, soldiers, and common folk, all chattering excitedly and pointing at the sheer scale of your encampment. The culture shock is profound. The architecture is the first thing that strikes you. The buildings are taller, grander, and built of stone, not mud brick. The soaring, slender minarets of the mosques are unlike anything you've seen before. The language is also a barrier. While Arabic is the language of the Quran and known to the scholars in your retinue, the everyday Egyptian dialect is fast and unfamiliar. You rely on the caravan's translators for everything. It is during this initial period of waiting that you get your first taste of the Cairene economy, and you encounter a strange but widespread local custom. You see people everywhere sipping a dark, steaming beverage from small cups. It's not tea. It's a new drink that has become a social craze in the city coffee. The beans originating from across the Red Sea in Yemen are roasted and brewed into a bitter, energizing drink. Coffee houses have sprung up all over the city, and they are centers of social life, places where men gather to talk business, play chess, and listen to storytellers. This is a fascinating tidbit of history. While coffee would take centuries to reach Europe, here in 14th century Cairo, it's already a well-established and popular part of daily urban life. You try a cup and the bitter, potent flavor is a jolt to your senses, much like the city itself. The arrival of such a powerful foreign ruler on his doorstep presents a delicate situation for the Mamluk Sultan, Al-Nasir Muhammad. This is the central historical event of this part of the journey. The Sultan is one of the most powerful rulers in the Islamic world. His empire is ancient, sophisticated, and proud. Protocol demands that a visiting ruler, even one as wealthy as Mansa Musa, should pay homage to him. It's a sign of respect for the Sultan's authority and his role as the guardian of the holy cities, which Musa is on his way to visit. An envoy arrives from the citadel, the massive fortress that dominates the city's skyline. He brings a message from the Sultan, a warm welcome to Cairo, and an invitation for Mansa Musa to come to the citadel for an audience. And here the first snag occurs. Mansa Musa politely refuses. The refusal is couched in the most diplomatic terms imaginable. He is but a humble pilgrim, he claims, and his only desire is to continue his journey to Mecca. He does not wish to be distracted by the affairs of state, but everyone, on both sides, understands the subtext. To go to the Sultan and perform the customary greeting, which might involve kissing the ground or the Sultan's hand, would be an act of submission. It would imply that the Mansa of Mali was a lesser ruler than the Sultan of Egypt, and Musa, the master of the world's gold supply, was not about to define himself as a subordinate. This sets off a delicate diplomatic dance. Messengers go back and forth between your camp and the citadel. The Sultan insists. The Mansa demurs. There's a tension in the air, the polite but firm standoff between two of the world's most powerful men. This raises a question that historians still ponder: was MUS as refusal a calculated assertion of power? Or was it rooted in a genuine, pious humility? Was he cleverly establishing his status as an equal? Or was he truly trying to avoid the pomp and ceremony of a royal court, as he claimed? The historical accounts, written by Cairene scholars, tend to portray him as proud and perhaps a bit naive of their customs. But it's equally possible he knew their customs all too well, and that's precisely why he refused. His golden calling card had gotten him to the gates of the world's great metropolis. Now, he was going to set the terms of his entrance. The diplomatic standoff between the two rulers cannot last forever. The pressure, both from the Mamluk court and from the needs of your own massive caravan, is immense. Finally, a compromise is reached, brokered by the skilled diplomats on both sides. Mansa Musa agrees to visit the citadel, but his spokesmen have made it clear he is coming to visit the Sultan as a fellow Muslim, a brother in faith, not as a vassal. The face-saving compromise is that he will offer a prayer to God upon his arrival, and any subsequent gesture will be to God alone. The day arrives for the formal entry into Cairo. The city is buzzing. The streets are lined with thousands of people, all eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary African king. You are part of the procession that follows the Mansa into the city, and the experience is a full-blown assault on the senses. The streets of Cairo are narrow, winding, and teeming with a density of life you could never have imagined. The noise is a constant roar, the shouts of merchants hawking their wares, the braying of donkeys struggling under heavy loads, the call to prayer echoing from a dozen different minarets, the chatter of 1,000 simultaneous conversations in a language you don't understand. The smells are even more intense, exotic spices from the market stalls, the sweet scent of perfume worn by the wealthy, the aroma of roasting meat, and underlying it all, the pungent, inescapable smell of a massive, crowded city. You march through the monumental gates, like Babziyu Wale, and find yourself in a labyrinth. The buildings loom over you, their upper stories leaning so far into the street they almost touch, creating a permanent twilight on the ground below. You see stunningly beautiful mosques with intricate geometric tile work, bustling public bathhouses, and sprawling covered markets, or souks, each dedicated to a different trade: the spice merchants, the coppersmiths, the textile seller. It is a spectacle of immense wealth and vibrant life. Finally, the procession reaches the citadel, the mighty fortress palace of the Mamluk sultans. It's a city within a city, a symbol of Rapar perched on a hill overlooking Cairo. As you enter, the noise of the city fades, replaced by a more hushed, reverent atmosphere. You are in the heart of Mamluk. Mansa Musa, dressed in simple but elegant white robes, is escorted into the grand audience hall. The historical accounts of this meeting, primarily from the Egyptian scholar Al-Umari, provide the mainstream narrative of what happened next. The hall is opulent, filled with Mamluk emirs in their finest silks. At its head sits the Sultan, Al-Masir Muhammad. As Musa approaches, an official gestures for him to kiss the ground, the standard protocol. And for a moment, Musa hesitates. This is the crux of the entire diplomatic drama. After all his resistance, he is faced with the demand directly. The chroniclers say he refused outright at first, saying, "I am a follower of the Maliki school of law, and they do not prostrate themselves before any but God." The tension in the room must have been palpable, but the Sultan's men were insistent. Finally, with what seems to have been a stroke of diplomatic genius, Musa declared, "Very well," and prostrated himself. But as he did so, he said loudly, "I prostrate myself before God who created me." He had fulfilled the protocol, but on his own terms, preserving his dignity by framing it as an act of worship, not fealty. The Sultan, a shrewd ruler himself, accepted the gesture, and the diplomatic crisis was averted. He welcomed Musa, had him sit beside him, and the two monarchs conversed for a long time. As you stand in the background, a minor attendant in a vast hall, you notice a small, peculiar detail of courtly life. Many of the highest-ranking Mamluk emirs, the powerful military commanders surrounding the Sultan, have a strange physical feature in common. A significant number of them are missing a finger or part of one. You later learn through court gossip the surprising reason why. These men are Mamluks, a unique warrior class. They were purchased as young slaves, typically from the Kipchak Turkic peoples of the steppe, and rigorously trained as elite soldiers. As part of their training and to prove their toughness and loyalty, they would engage in a game that involved firing arrows at a gourd placed on their own hand. Losing a fingertip was a common result, and it became an informal badge of honor, a sign that you belong to this exclusive, battle-hardened brotherhood. It's a bizarre and brutal little piece of their culture. The meeting between Musa and the Sultan raises an ongoing debate among historians. The Egyptian sources, like Al-Umari's, paint Musa as being somewhat overwhelmed by the splendor of Cairo and the authority of the Sultan. They record the Sultan honoring him with robes and gifts, a traditional sign of a superior bestowing favor on a visitor. But is this an unbiased account? Or is it a narrative shaped by Cairene pride, written to flatter their own ruler by subtly diminishing the visitor. Some historians push back against this interpretation. They argue that Musa was a highly intelligent and self-aware ruler who knew exactly how to play the game. His initial refusal was a blunder. It was a negotiation. His final, clever prostration was a masterclass in saving face. He may have received the robes of honor, but he was about to unleash a display of wealth that would make the Sultan's gifts look like pocket change. They argue that we should be skeptical of the Cairene perspective and see this not as a story of a provincial king being awed by the big city, but as a meeting of two equals, each using the tools of diplomacy and custom to assert their own power and prestige. The true balance of power in that room is still a matter of perspective. For now, the formalities are over. The two rulers have met. A friendship, or at least a respectful truce, has been established. Now, freed from the constraints of diplomacy, Mansa Musa is about to do what he came here to do. Besides, pray show Cairo what real wealth looks like. With the diplomatic pleasantries out of the way, Mansa Musa and his retinue are free to experience Cairo. And more importantly, Cairo is free to experience Mansa Musa. He and his court are given lavish guest quarters, and a period of rest and tourism begins. But for Musa, tourism means something very different. It means generosity on a scale that the city, for all its wealth, has never seen before. This is the part of the story that made him a legend. The famous spending spree begins. It starts with the official gifts. Musa showers the Sultan, Al-Nasir Muhammad, and his high-ranking emirs with gifts of pure gold. Not small, symbolic trinkets, but immense quantities of unworked gold, raw dust and nuggets that speak of an inexhaustible source. The Cairene court is stunned. They are accustomed to wealth, but this is something else entirely. This is foundational wealth, the very stuff of mountains. But the real show begins when MUS, as entourage starts interacting with the city itself. They flood the famous souks, the sprawling markets of Khan el-Khalili. And they don't haggle. They don't bargain. They pay whatever price is asked. And then they add more on top as a gift. A courtier from Mali might buy a silk robe worth 10 dinars and pay with a chunk of gold worth 20. The Mansa himself, when he visits mosques or charitable foundations, leaves behind enormous donations of gold. The defining characteristic of this period is his indiscriminate generosity. He gives gold to seemingly everyone he meets. His attendants walk through the streets and hand out pouches of gold dust to the poor and needy. If a merchant in the market pleases him with a fine piece of cloth, he doesn't just buy the cloth, he gives the merchant enough gold to retire. You, as a part of this caravan, are both a witness and a participant. You are given a generous stipend of gold dust to spend, and you find that your purchasing power is practically limitless. You can buy goods you've only dreamed of: fine steel blades from Damascus, intricate glassware, scholarly books copied onto expensive paper. The mainstream knowledge is this simple fact: Mansa Musa's profligate spending was so vast that it single-handedly disrupted the entire economy of the region. He pumped so much gold into the Cairene market that he dramatically increased the money supply. This is the heart of his economic legacy in Egypt. As you wander the markets, you come across a peculiar and fascinating item for sale that gives you a little insight into the daily life and beliefs of the Cairenes. In the perfumer's souk, alongside vials of rose oil and frankincense, you see merchants selling small, written scrolls and folded pieces of paper. These are not poems or letters. They are amulets. A local translator explains that these are verses from the Quran, meticulously copied by a scholar, which people buy to wear for protection. They might be worn to ward off illness, to ensure a safe journey, or to protect against the evil eye, a widespread belief in a curse transmitted by a malevolent glare. It's a reminder that for many people, faith was not just an abstract concept, but a practical, tangible force that could be harnessed for daily protection. The written word itself was seen as having power. Now, the central question that emerges from this behavior, one that historians and economists still love to discuss, was Mus's generosity a genuine expression of his character? Or was it a form of ostentatious display, a calculated act of conspicuous consumption? One school of thought argues for his genuine piety and kindness. In Islamic tradition, charity zakat is a religious obligation. Giving alms to the poor is a fundamental good deed. From this perspective, Musa was simply fulfilling his religious duty on a scale commensurate with his immense wealth. He was a good Muslim king sharing God's bounty. The historical accounts do describe him as having a noble and kind character, and this behavior would be consistent with that portrait. However, another perspective sees it as a strategic, if perhaps unintentional, power play. In a world where prestige and influence were everything, this level of spending was a statement. It was a nonverbal way of saying that the wealth of the Mamluk Sultanate, as magnificent as it was nothing compared to the wealth of the Mali Empire. It was the ultimate flex. By devaluing the very commodity that underpinned the global economy, he was demonstrating a power that transcended military might or ancient lineage. He could literally change the value of money. This view frames him less as a saintly pilgrim and more as a nouveau rich emperor on the grandest of tours, announcing his arrival and importance to the old money establishment of the Middle East. Was he a pious giver or a fabulous show-off? The truth is likely somewhere in between. He was probably a genuinely pious man for whom spectacular generosity was also the most effective way to project his power and the glory of his empire. You see the immediate effects of this firehose of gold on the streets. The merchants are ecstatic. The poor are grateful. There's a festival atmosphere in the city. Your entourage is treated with a mixture of awe and reverence. You are the people from the land of gold, and your king is the most generous man who ever lived. For now it seems like a wonderful, city-wide party funded by a limitless credit card. But the laws of economics are as unforgiving as the desert you just crossed. The consequences of this golden flood are beginning to gather, like unseen storm clouds on the horizon. The party can't last forever. The initial euphoria that greeted Mansa Musa's boundless generosity slowly begins to curdle into something more complex economic chaos. It doesn't happen overnight, but day by day, you start to see the unintended consequences of your emperor's open-handedness. The first sign is simple inflation. The price of everyday goods begins to creep up. The baker who sold you a loaf of bread for a small copper coin yesterday now wants two. Why? Because everyone suddenly has more gold. The merchants, realizing that their new customers from Mali will pay any price, start raising their prices accordingly. Soon a pouch of gold dust that could have bought a fine horse last week can now only buy a donkey. Your own generous stipend starts to feel a little less impressive. Then, the value of gold itself begins to plummet. This is the core historical outcome of Musa's visit, the fact repeated in every textbook. Gold was the basis of the regional economy, the standard against which everything else was measured. By pumping so much of it into the market, Musa fundamentally altered the delicate balance of supply and demand. Gold became common. The Cairene dinar, a gold coin that was a stable and respected currency across the Mediterranean, began to lose its value. Suddenly, silver, which had been the lesser metal, became more desirable because of its newfound rarity relative to gold. You witnessed this firsthand in the markets. You see money changers who a month ago were desperate for gold, now looking at it with a weary expression. They have too much of it. They'd rather have silver dirhams or even copper FULs. A wealthy Cairene merchant might complain to his friend that the dowry for his daughter, which he had saved in gold dinars, has effectively lost a huge chunk of its purchasing power. Ordinary people on fixed incomes, whose savings were in gold, find themselves poor through no fault of their own. The economic turmoil gives rise to a quirky and revealing phenomenon on the streets, the rise of the professional appraiser. With the value of gold so volatile, ordinary merchants can no longer trust their own judgment. You start to see men setting up small stalls with highly accurate scales and testing its touchstones and needles to verify the purity of gold. They become essential middlemen in any significant transaction. This isn't just a fun fact, it's a symptom of a broken market. When the fundamental measure of value becomes unstable, you need specialists to navigate the confusion. Trust in the currency has eroded, so trust is outsourced to these experts. The reaction among the local Cairenes is fascinating to watch. The initial ingratitude directed at your caravan begin to be mixed with confusion and resentment. You overhear conversations in the coffee houses. An emir who received a lavish gift of gold from Musa might be initially pleased, But then he realizes that the gift has simultaneously devalued all the other gold he already possessed. A government official in the Sultan's treasury might be tearing his hair out, trying to figure out how to pay the army when the value of the state's gold reserves is dropping daily. This is where a significant historical debate lies. How aware was Mansa Musa of the economic chaos he was causing? The traditional narrative, based on the chronicler Al-Umari's account, suggests he was somewhat naive. Al-Umari, writing years later, claimed that he spoke to Musa's courtiers who said the Mansa had no idea he was doing any damage. From this viewpoint, he was an outsider, unfamiliar with the complex market economics of a city like Cairo, who was simply being generous according to the customs of his own land, where gold was more abundant. He was, in this interpretation, an accidental economy wrecker. However, a more revisionist take suggests that this view might be too simplistic, and perhaps a bit patronizing. Could the ruler of a vast trading empire, one who controlled the source of West Africa's gold, truly be ignorant of the basic laws of supply and demand? Some historians argue that it's unlikely. They propose a more complex scenario. Perhaps Musa knew, at least in principle, that introducing so much gold would have an effect, but he either underestimated the scale of that effect or considered it an acceptable consequence of his primary goals, displaying his power and fulfilling his charitable duties. Another, more Machiavellian interpretation, is that the disruption was, to some degree, intentional, a subtle way to demonstrate that the Mali Empire was an economic superpower capable of shaking the foundations of the established Mamluk order. Was he an innocent, abroad, or shrewd, if reckless, economic actor? The historical record is silent on his true intentions, leaving it a tantalizing puzzle. The chronicler Al-Umari famously stated that the price of gold in Cairo was cheapened and remained so for more than a decade after Musa's visit. While the exact timeline is debated by modern economists, was it really 12 years? Or was that a symbolic number? The immediate impact is undeniable. You have been part of an event that people will be talking about for generations. You came to Cairo as part of a golden river, and you have left behind a flood. The city is richer in raw gold, but poorer in economic stability. And now, having thoroughly upended the economy of the most powerful state in the region, it's time for your caravan to reform. The spiritual heart of the journey still lies ahead. Mecca awaits. Leaving Cairo is a very different experience from arriving. When you entered, you were a mysterious and awe-inspiring procession. Now, as you leave, you are legends, but also the source of widespread economic disruption. The Cairenes who watch you go have complex expressions, a mixture of residual awe, some lingering gratitude from those who benefited, but also a palpable sense of relief from the officials and merchants who now have to clean up the economic mess. The caravan reassembles, restocked and replenished after the long layover. The mood among your fellow travelers is high. They are laden with the exotic goods of Cairo, fine textiles, books, spices, and weapons. They have stories to tell that will be repeated in their families for generations. The first, and arguably most difficult, leg of the journey is over. They have crossed the Sahara and seen the greatest city on earth. Now they turn their faces east towards the holiest destination of all. The journey from Cairo to Mecca is a well-trodden path, the traditional route for Egyptian pilgrims. You travel across the Sinai Peninsula, a harsh and rocky desert, but one with established watering holes and caravan stops. The sense of danger that permeated the trans-Saharan crossing is lessened here. You are in a policed, controlled territory of the Mamluk Sultanate, and you are traveling a road that has been used by the faithful for centuries. The focus of the caravan shifts. The ostentatious display of wealth eases. The primary mission, the spiritual purpose of the Hajj, now comes to the forefront. You see more time dedicated to prayer and religious instruction. The scholars who have accompanied the Mansa from Mali become more prominent, leading study circles in the evenings. The conversations shift from the price of goods in the Cairo souk to the rituals of the pilgrimage that lie ahead. It's on this leg of the journey, as you travel through the Sinai, that you learn a fascinating and little-known piece of information about the logistics of the Hajj in this era. For the annual pilgrimage, the Mamluk Sultan organized a massive, official caravan from Cairo, known as the Malmal. This was just a group of pilgrims. It was a state-sponsored procession that carried the keys while the new, ornate black silk cloth used to cover the Kaaba in Mecca. The Manal was accompanied by a large military force and carried provisions and water not just for itself, but also to be distributed to the poor in the holy cities. Your caravan, as vast and wealthy as it is essentially tagging along on our routes, a cordon maintained by the Sultan's power. It's a subtle reminder of the Mamluks' role as the self-proclaimed servants of the holy places. The journey is still arduous. The Sinai is a formidable desert, but there's a new sense of purpose, a spiritual yearning that unites the travelers. You see it in the Mansa himself. He seems less like the staggeringly wealthy monarch of Cairo and more like a genuine pilgrim. He spends more time in discussion with his religious advisors, his face often set in a look of quiet contemplation. The weight of his empire seems to have lifted slightly, replaced by the weight of spiritual expectation. This change in focus brings up a historical question that is difficult to answer definitively. What was the state of religious scholarship and Islamic practice in the Mali Empire before MUS's journey? We know Islam was the religion of the court in the major trading cities like Niamey and Timbuktu. But how did it compare to the great centers of learning like Cairo? Was Malian Islam considered provincial or peripheral by the scholars of the heartlands? The historical evidence is sparse, leading to a debate. One view holds that Islam in Mali was vibrant but relatively isolated, with its own unique synthesis of Islamic doctrine and local West African traditions. MUS's journey in this light was not just a pilgrimage but an educational mission, a way to connect his empire's scholars with the mainstream of Islamic thought, to acquire books, and to bring back the latest theological and legal scholarship. Another view argues that thanks to the trans-Saharan trade routes, Mali was already more connected to the intellectual currents of the Islamic world than is often assumed. Scholars and books traveled along with golden salt. In this interpretation, MUS's journey was less about catching up and more about announcing that his empire's intellectual centers, like the burgeoning city of Timbuktu, were ready to be considered peers, not pupils, of the older establishments. As you near the coast of the Red Sea, the final obstacle before Arabia, you see the preparations for the sea crossing. Hundreds of dhows, the traditional sailing ships of the region, are contracted to ferry the massive caravan across the water. The logistics are once again staggering, getting tens of thousands of people, their animals, and their supplies onto this fleet of small ships is a monumental undertaking. The mood is one of almost feverish anticipation. You stand on the shore looking east across the water. You have walked for months across the world's greatest desert and witnessed the splendor and chaos of Cairo. Now, just across this narrow sea, lies the Arabian Peninsula, the land where your faith was born. The final stage of the pilgrimage is about to begin. The Red Sea crossing is a chaotic but mercifully short affair. Packed onto the wooden dhows, you leave the shores of Africa behind. The journey across the water feels like a symbolic threshold. You are leaving the continent of your birth and entering Arabia, the cradle of Islam. When you land, the very ground feels different. The air is hotter, drier, and carries the salty tang of the sea. You are now in the Hijaz, the western region of the Arabian Peninsula. The landscape is stark and mountainous, a world of jagged brown peaks and deep, shadowed valleys. The authority of the Mamluk Sultan is weaker here, and local Sharifist nobles who claim descent from the Prophet Muhammad hold a great deal of power. Your caravan's large military escort, which seemed almost ceremonial in Egypt, once again feels like a vital necessity. The final leg of the journey to Mecca is filled with a unique spiritual energy. You are now treading on sacred ground. The caravan passes by sites mentioned in the Quran, places where prophets are said to have walked. The scholars point them out, and small prayers are offered. The entire procession feels less like a royal turn, more like a river of devotion flowing towards its source. Finally, you reach the Miqat, the designated station where pilgrims must enter the state of Cairo. This is a crucial moment in the Hajj. Here all signs of social status and wealth are meant to be shed. The men, from the Mansa himself down to the humblest servant, remove their fine, tailored robes. They all don the same simple attire to pieces of seamless white cloth. One is wrapped around the waist, the other draped over the shoulder. No head coverings, no sewn garments, no perfume. The women also adopt simple, modest dress. To see Mansa Musa, the man whose wealth broke the Cairene economy, dressed in the same simple white cloth as everyone else, is a profoundly powerful moment. The gold staffs are put away. The silk parasols are furled. The king who commanded 60,000 people is now, visually at least, indistinguishable from any other pilgrim. This is the great equalizer of the Hajj. In the state of Iram, all are equal before God. The emperor has truly become a pilgrim. At last, you arrive at the gates of Mecca. The city is nestled in a barren valley, surrounded by forbidding mountains. It's not a grand imperial capital like Cairo, but its importance is of a different, more profound order. The streets are crowded with pilgrims from every corner of the known world: Arabs, Persians, Indians, Turks, and now a massive contingent from West Africa. You hear a dozen languages, but you see everyone dressed in the same simple white cloth. It is a vision of universal faith. And then you see it. In the center of the city, in the courtyard of the great mosque, stands the Kaaba, the simple, perfect black cube, draped in its dark silken case wall. It is the direction you have faced in prayer your entire life, and to see it in person is an emotionally overwhelming experience. A hush falls over your group. People weep openly. The months of hardship, the endless miles of desert, all of it culminates in this single, powerful vision. You watch as Mansa Musa, surrounded by his closest attendants but still just a man in a white shroud, performs the tawaf, the ritual of circling the Kaaba 7 times. His face, which you have seen display the gravity of a ruler and the polite mask of a diplomat, now shows nothing but pure, unadulterated devotion. He is overcome with emotion. This is the mainstream historical account. His pilgrimage was, at its heart, a genuine and deeply felt act of faith. During your time in Mecca, you learn an interesting piece of local lore that speaks to the city's unique economy. Mecca produces almost nothing. It has no agriculture, no major industries. Its entire existence is predicated on the Hajj. But what happens for the other 10 months of the year? You learn that many Meccan families have a fascinating side hustle. They are pilgrim hosts. A family might have a long-standing relationship with a family from, say, Damascus or Baghdad. When the pilgrims arrive, they stay in the Meccan family's home, who provide lodging and food in exchange for payment or valuable goods. It's a system of religious tourism that has sustained the city for centuries, a network of personal relationships that crisscrosses the entire Islamic world. Musa, of course, does not forget his habit of generosity. He distributes vast amounts of gold here as well, funding repairs for the mosque, giving alms to the city's poor, and bestowing lavish gifts upon the Sharifs of Mecca. He is honoring the holy city and its guardians. But this act of piety raises a subtle historical question. By performing the Hajj in such a spectacular fashion and spending so lavishly, was Musa simply a pilgrim, or was he also making a geopolitical statement? The Sharifs of Mecca and Medina held a position of immense prestige in the Islamic world, but they were politically and financially dependent on the Sultan of Egypt. Mus's arrival with his independent wealth offered them, at least in theory, an alternative source of patronage. Some historians speculate whether his generosity was also a subtle way of increasing his own influence in the holy cities, chipping away at the Mamluks' exclusive role as patrons. Was he trying to buy influence in the very heart of Islam? It's unlikely to have been his primary motive, but for a ruler as shrewd as Musa, the political implications of his actions would not have been lost on him. For now, all such political considerations seemed secondary. You have reached the destination. You perform the rituals of the Hajj alongside your emperor and thousands of your countrymen. You have stood at the center of your world. The journey, however, is only half over. You still have to get home, and the journey back will present a new and entirely unexpected set of challenges. The spiritual climax of the Hajj is over. The rituals are complete. The state of Iram is lifted, and people return to their normal clothes. A profound sense of accomplishment and spiritual renewal settles over the caravan. But now the mundane reality of logistics reasserts itself. You are thousands of miles from home, and the journey back looms large. The caravan retraces its steps, heading back towards Cairo. But as you travel, a bizarre and almost unbelievable rumor starts to circulate among the senior officials. At first, you dismiss it as impossible. The whispers say that the treasury is running low, that the Mansa, the Golden King, the man who single-handedly broke the economy of Cairo, is short on cash. It seems like a joke. How could the wealthiest man on earth run out of money? But the rumor persists, and you start to see small signs that it might be true. The casual, open-handed generosity has stopped. Purchases of supplies are made with more care, with actual haggling. The festive, free-spending atmosphere of the journey out has been replaced by a more sober, frugal mood. The truth is both simple and stunning. Mansa Musa had been so extravagantly generous in Cairo, Mecca, and Medina, handing out gold with no thought for the morrow, that he had genuinely spent, given away, or otherwise disposed of a massive portion of the liquid assets he brought with him. He had funded a city-wide party in Cairo and left a trail of gold away to Mecca, and now the bill was coming due. The world's richest man had a cash flow problem. This incredible turn of events is a well-documented part of his story, recounted by the chroniclers who learned of it when he returned to Egypt. It highlights the difference between total net worth and available cash. Musa was still the emperor of a land of gold, but the gold was back in Mali. What he had with him, the vast fortune loaded onto 100 camels, was finite, and he had spent it with the cheerful abandon of someone who believed it was not. As the caravan limps back towards Cairo, you encounter a strange and fascinating custom of the road, a piece of traveler's trivia. You see other, smaller caravans and pilgrims tying rags or strips of cloth to the branches of certain trees at crossroads or near wells. A guide explains that this is a folk tradition, a kind of prayer or vow. A traveler might tie a rag and make a wish for a safe journey, or promise to give to charity if they make it home safely. It's a practice not strictly sanctioned by Orthodox Islam or remnant of older folk beliefs, but it's a poignant and visible record of the hopes and anxieties of the countless travelers who have passed this way. The trees stand as silent witnesses, fluttering with the prayers of thousands. The man's predicament, this royal cash crunch, poses an interesting question for historians. How could his financial advisors have let this happen? An emperor doesn't travel alone. He has a treasurer, accountants, and quartermasters. Did they fail to plan adequately? Were they too intimidated by their king's piety and generosity to warn him that he was spending too fast? One theory is that the scale of the spending in Cairo simply exceeded all their projections. They might have budgeted for generous almsgiving, but not for single-handedly hyperinflating the currency of a major metropolis. Another theory suggests that the problem was a lack of planning, but a cultural difference in the very concept of wealth. In the Mali Empire, wealth was rooted in the control of the gold sources themselves. The idea of running out of the gold one carried with them might have seemed a temporary and trivial problem to a man who owned the mines. Why worry about the water in your flask when you own the entire river? Whatever the reason, the result is the same. The Emperor of Gold needs a loan to get home. The news of the man's impending return precedes him to Cairo. The mood in the city is apprehensive. What will his return bring? More economic chaos, more unpredictable behavior. The merchants and moneylenders of Cairo, however, see something else. They see an opportunity. The king who had showered them with gold was now returning in a state of need, and a king in need is a potential customer. As you approach the outskirts of the second time, the situation is completely reversed. On the way out, you were a conquering economic force. Now, you are returning as humble supplicates, a king in need of credit. The stage is set for one of the most ironic and fascinating business deals in medieval history. Your second arrival in Cairo is a study in contrasts. The triumphant procession is gone, replaced by a more subdued, business-like atmosphere. Mansa Musa doesn't need to make a statement this time. He needs to make a deal. He is about to perform an economic maneuver that is, in its own way, as brilliant as his initial display of wealth. He is going to borrow back his own gold. He doesn't go begging. That would be beneath his dignity. Instead, he summons the great merchants and moneylenders of Cairo to his camp, the very men whose businesses he had inadvertently thrown into chaos just a few months earlier. They arrive, cautious and curious. They are the masters of finance in one of the world's great commercial hubs, and they are about to negotiate with the king. This is the mainstream historical account of the event. Mansa Musa, having depleted his ready supply of gold, was forced to borrow money at exorbitant rates from Cairene lenders to finance his return journey. He effectively took his own devalued gold out of the market, but at a premium. The chronicler Al-Umari notes this with a certain tone of satisfaction, as if the natural economic order was reasserting itself. The profligate king was now learning a hard lesson in finance from the shrewd businessmen of Cairo. But as you witness the negotiations, you realize it might be more complicated than that. Musa is not a desperate man. He is a strategic one. He doesn't just ask for a loan, he frames it as a business opportunity for the lenders. He needs gold now, but he has limitless gold back in his empire. He offers them a deal they cannot refuse. Lend him gold today, and he will repay it with immense interest, not in Cairo, but from the source, from Mali. He is essentially selling futures on his kingdom's output. In the midst of these high-stakes financial dealings, you observe a peculiar local business practice that seems almost quaint by comparison. In the Cairo markets, you notice that many transactions are finalized not with a signed document, but with a complex, interlocking handshake. It's not a simple clasp of hands. It's a series of specific gripped taps and finger movements, a silent, tactile language that confirms the terms of the deal and seals the agreement. This deal-maker's handshake is a form of non-verbal contract. Its intricate patterns known only to those within a certain trade guild or merchant community. In a world where many were illiterate, the unique, hard-to-forge handshake was a powerful tool for building trust and ensuring that both parties understood and agreed to the terms. The loans to Musa are granted. The Cairene merchants, who are nothing if not astute, recognize a golden opportunity literally. They are effectively investing in the Mali Empire. By lending to the Mansa, they are forging a direct financial link to the source of the world's gold. It's a high-risk, high-reward venture, and they take it. This is where a fascinating historical debate unfolds. Was Mansa Musa a victim of his own extravagance, forced to take on crippling debt, as the Cairene sources imply? Or was this a calculated, strategic move to fix the very problem he had created? The traditional view paints him as being taken advantage of. He had messed with powerful economic forces he didn't understand, and now he was paying the price in interest. But a more modern, economic history perspective offers a compelling alternative. By borrowing massive amounts of gold from the Cairo market, Musa was performing what we would now call a monetary contraction. He was effectively mopping up the excess liquidity he had injected into the system. He was taking all that cheap, devalued gold out of circulation. The immediate effect was that the price of gold in Cairo began to rise again. With the supply suddenly shrinking, the value of the dinar started to stabilize. In this interpretation, Musa was just getting a loan. He was single-handedly fixing the gold market. He broke it on the way out, and he fixed it on the way back. Was this intentional? Did he sit down with his advisors and say, "Let's borrow gold to reverse the inflation we caused"? That level of sophisticated, Keynesian-style thinking is perhaps anachronistic. But it's possible he understood on an intuitive level that by reclaiming the gold, he was restoring its value and, not coincidentally, restoring his own prestige. He had shown he could give gold away so freely it became worthless, and now he was showing he could command it back so powerfully that its value soared. Whether by accident or by brilliant design, his actions had a profound effect. He had not only secured the funds for his journey home, but he had also turned his debt into an investment vehicle for the Cairene elite, forging new trade relationships that would benefit his empire for years to come. He had also stabilized the currency of the most important trading hub in the region. He was just a borrower. He was, in effect, the central banker of the Eastern Mediterranean. With his finances secured and his economic statement made, the Mansa prepares for the final long trek home. The caravan is ready, but it's not the same caravan that left Cairo the first time. It has new members now, passengers who are not from Mali, but who are heading there with a purpose. Their presence will change the empire forever. The caravan that leaves Cairo for the second and final time is visibly different. The number of people might be roughly the same, but the composition has changed. On the journey out, it was an exclusively West African affair. Now, as you begin the long march back across the Sahara, you see new faces in the crowd. Men with different features, different styles of dress, and speaking Arabic as their native tongue. Mansa Musa didn't just borrow gold in Cairo. He went on a hiring spree. Using his newly acquired funds and the promise of immense future rewards, he recruited some of the brightest minds of the Islamic world to return with him to Mali. This is a pivotal, and often overlooked, outcome of his pilgrimage. He was just bringing back souvenirs and stories. He was importing intellectual capital on a massive scale. Who were these new recruits? You see them walking in small groups, deep in conversation, their robes marking them as men of learning. There are scholars and theologians, masters of Islamic law and philosophy from the great Al-Azhar Mosque University. There are poets, whose job will be to craft the epic narrative of the man's journey. There are scientists and mathematicians carrying precious books filled with knowledge from across the known world. Perhaps the most significant of all the new hires is a man named Richest al-Seychelles. He is not a scholar or a poet. He is an architect and a man of letters from Granada, the last stronghold of Muslim rule in Spain. Musa had met him in Mecca and was captivated by his knowledge and sophistication. Al-Seychelles is a product of the refined, artistically advanced culture of Al-Andalus, and he is about to bring that aesthetic to the heart of West Africa. This is a well-documented historical fact. Al-Seychelles' journey to Mali would revolutionize the architecture of the region. As you re-enter the vastness of the Sahara, the mood is different from the first crossing. There is a sense of purpose and a quiet confidence that was absent before. You are veterans now. You know the rhythms of the desert. But for the new members of the caravan, the Cairene scholars and the Andalusian architect, this is a terrifying, unwondrous new experience. You watch them huddled in their warmer than necessary robes, staring out at the endless expanse of sand with a mixture of fear and academic curiosity. They are leaving the center of their world for what they probably consider the farthest edge of civilization. During one of the long, monotonous evenings, you overhear a fascinating conversation between two of the newly hired scholars. They are discussing the astrolabe, a complex brass instrument that one of them has brought with him. To you, it's just a beautiful, intricate object. But to them, it's a portable computer. This small piece of trivia opens up a window into the scientific world of the 14th century. The astrolabe could be used to determine the time of day or night, to measure the height of a mountain, to cast a horoscope, and most importantly for a traveler, to determine one's latitude by sighting the stars. It was the GPS of the medieval world. Watching the scholar demonstrate its use, you realize that the knowledge being imported into your empire is not just philosophical, but deeply practical and scientific. This brain drain from the established Islamic centers to Mali raises an interesting question for historians. What were Mus's motivations for recruiting these men? Was it purely for the prestige of having famous scholars at his court, a way to keep up with the Joneses of the Islamic world? Or was it part of a deliberate, long-term strategy to transform his empire? The prestige argument certainly has merit. Having a court filled with famous intellectuals was a major status symbol for any powerful ruler of the era. It demonstrated his piety, his sophistication, and his wealth. But many historians argue that Mus's vision was far more profound. He wasn't just collecting scholars like trophies, he was investing in infrastructure. He understood that for his empire to be truly great, it needed more than just gold. It needed a robust intellectual and cultural foundation. He was laying the groundwork to turn his major cities, particularly Timbuktu, into world-class centers of learning that could rival Cairo, Baghdad, or Cordoba. He was nation-building. This recruitment duct was just a one-way street. What motivated a renowned scholar or a successful architect like Al-Seychelles to leave the familiar comforts of Cairo or the refined beauty of Granada for a perilous journey into the unknown? The promise of wealth was certainly a major factor. Mansa Musa paid them exceptionally well. He famously gave Al-Seychelles a huge sum of gold just for being presented to him. But there was likely another motivation: opportunity. In the established ancient centers of the Islamic world, the paths to advancement were often rigid and slow. In Mali, they had a chance to build something new. They were getting in on the ground floor of a massive ambitious project backed by a king with seemingly limitless resources. It was a frontier, a place where a talented and ambitious person could make a name for themselves in a way that might be impossible back home. As the caravan presses on, you feel like you are no longer just part of a pilgrimage returning home. You are part of a mobile university, a traveling construction company, a cultural delegation. You are bringing the heart of the Islamic world's knowledge back with you. The gold that was spent in Cairo has been transformed. It has been converted into human potential. And this new kind of wealth is about to reshape the future of the Mali Empire. The return journey across the Sahara feels both faster and longer than the first crossing. Faster, because you are now seasoned veterans of the desert, familiar with its rhythms and its dangers. Longer, because a deep, bone-weary longing for home is set in. The novelty is gone, replaced by a grim determination to simply finish the journey. Finally, after months that feel like years, you cross the threshold back into the familiar lands of the Mali Empire. The sight of the first baobab tree, the sound of the Malinki language being spoken by villagers who come out to greet you, the familiar scent of the Sahel, it's an emotional homecoming. The caravan, which has been a self-contained nation for so long, begins to dissolve back into the empire it came from. Your journey ends where it began, in the capital city of Niamey. But the city you return to is not the one you left. News of the pilgrimage carried by faster, smaller caravans has preceded you. The stories have grown with each telling, becoming the stuff of legend. The tale of crossing the Sahara, of the splendor of Cairo, of the man's incredible generosity and his meeting with the Sultan. These stories have cemented his status as a near mythical figure among his own people. He returns not just as a king, but as a hero who has seen the world and impressed it with the power and glory of Mali. But the real changes are yet to come. The return of the Mansa is not an end, but a beginning. With his new contingent of scholars, architects, and poets, he sets about transforming his empire. And the primary focus of his efforts is a city you may have only heard of before as a dusty trading post on the edge of the desert Timbuktu. This is the great, lasting legacy of the pilgrimage. Historically, Timbuktu was already an important stop for the trans-Saharan salt trade, but it was Mansa Musa who elevated it into a legendary center of learning and culture. He commissions his new architect, Al-Saishalai, to undertake a massive building campaign. You witness the beginning of this transformation. Al-Saishalai, a stranger from a distant land, begins to direct local craftsmen. He introduces architectural techniques they have never seen before. The most significant of these is the use of fired bricks. Traditional West African architecture used banko, a form of mud brick, which was versatile but vulnerable to rain. Al-Saishalai brings the technology of the kiln of baking bricks until they are hardened, durable. With this new material, he begins to construct buildings of a scale and permanence previously unknown in the region. The most famous of these is the Jingyui Rebbe Mosque. You watch as its foundations are laid, a fusion of two worlds. The overall design retains the monumental, pyramidal style of the Sahel, but it's executed with new techniques. Al-Saishalai incorporates wooden beams Tehran that jut out from the walls, a distinctive feature of Sudano-Sahelian architecture that serves both as decoration and as scaffolding for annual repairs. The result is a new architectural language, a synthesis of Andalusian engineering and West African aesthetics. Alongside the mosques, new madrasas schools are built, and a grand new palace for the Mansa himself. Timbuktu begins to shed its skin as a rough-and-tumble trading town and grow into a sophisticated urban center. In the midst of this grand construction, you learn a quirky detail about the process, a tidbit that highlights the fusion of cultures. Al-Saishalai, accustomed to the precise stonework of Granada, was initially baffled by the properties of mud brick. Local legend says that he struggled to build a durable, flat roof that could withstand the rainy season. An old, local builder is said to have shown him a traditional technique using layers of mud mixed with rice husks and shea butter, which created a waterproof, slightly flexible surface. The great architect from a sophisticated foreign land had to learn from the indigenous knowledge of the people he was hired to teach. It was a two-way exchange of ideas. The construction of Timbuktu as a center of learning raises an ongoing academic debate. Was this organic growth or a state-driven prestige project? Did Timbuktu naturally evolve into a scholarly hub because of its strategic location and wealth? Or was it a top-down, intentional creation willed into existence by Mansa Musa's ambition and gold? Some scholars argue for the organic model, suggesting that Timbuktu's role as a terminus for the desert caravans meant it was always a place where ideas and books would accumulate. Musa simply accelerated a process that was already underway. But the more compelling argument leans towards the great man theory. The sheer speed and scale of the transformation suggested a deliberate, royally funded project. Musa saw the potential of Timbuktu and poured immense resources into making his vision a reality. He didn't just build mosques. He established endowments to fund the salaries of scholars and to create a market for books. He was building an intellectual ecosystem from scratch. You see the scholars he brought from Cairo settling in, establishing libraries, and beginning to teach. The demand for books skyrockets. A new scribal industry springs up with artisans meticulously copying texts on law, astronomy, mathematics, and theology. The city becomes a magnet, attracting students and thinkers from all over West Africa and beyond. You have returned from one of the world's great cities only to witness the birth of another. The gold that was lavished on Cairo is now being reinvested at home. But instead of building temporary prestige, it's building a legacy of stone, brick, and knowledge that will last for centuries. Life in the Mali Empire after the Great Pilgrimage is palpably different. The Mansa's journey has become the defining event of the era, a story told and retold by the griots in every marketplace. It has infused the empire with a new sense of confidence and a tangible connection to the wider world. The abstract idea of the global Islamic community, the Ummah, is no longer abstract. You have seen it. You were part of it. You now live in the golden age of the empire. The wealth from the gold mines continues to flow, but now it's being used with a new purpose. It's not just for funding the court or the army. It's for funding culture. The construction in Timbuktu is the most visible sign, but the effects are felt everywhere. The new architectural style pioneered by Al-Seychelles begins to influence buildings in other cities. Like Goenjin, a uniquely Mali unroyal style emerges, a proud statement of the empire's identity. The arts flourish. The demand for luxury goods, stimulated by the treasures brought back from Cairo, leads to a refinement in local crafts. You see it in the intricate work of the goldsmiths, the fine quality of the woven textiles, and the beautifully decorated leather goods. The court becomes a major patron of the arts, and the competition for royal favor pushes artisans to new heights of creativity. This period of cultural flourishing is a direct and well-documented result of the pilgrimage. The exposure to the wider world created new tastes and new ambitions. You also witness the impact on education. The new madrasas in Timbuktu are thriving. The Sankor Mosque, which existed before Musa, is expanded and transforms into a true university, a collection of independent schools, each with its own master scholar. Young men from all over the empire now aspire to travel to Timbuktu to study, just as Musa traveled to Mecca to pray. In this new, intellectually charged environment, you encounter a fascinating and little-known aspect of the book trade in Timbuktu. Books are the most valuable commodity in the city, sometimes fetching higher prices than slaves or salt. The copying of books is a highly respected and lucrative profession. But how did they prevent intellectual property theft? You learn that the scribes and scholars had a unique system of certification. When a student had mastered a particular text under a teacher, the teacher would handwrite an ijazah, or a license, on the student's personal copy of the book. This certificate listed the entire chain of teachers, going back as far as possible, sometimes all the way to the original author. It was a formal academic genealogy that guaranteed the authenticity of the text and the legitimacy of the scholar. A book without a proper ijazah was considered suspect, a potential forgery. It was a medieval form of copyright and quality control rolled into one. The empire is not just flourishing internally. Its reputation has exploded internationally. The story of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, his incredible wealth, and his generosity has spread like wildfire through the merchant networks and pilgrim routes. The tale is told in the markets of Morocco, the palaces of Tunis, and the ports of Italy. For the first time, The Mali Empire is firmly on the mental map of the rest of the world. This leads to a point of historical debate. Did the pilgrimage ultimately strengthen the empire or expose it to new dangers? The immediate effects were overwhelmingly positive. The journey fostered a new sense of national identity, sparked a cultural renaissance, and established trade and diplomatic connections. It was the peak of Malian power and prestige. Musa had put his empire on the map, both literally and figuratively. However, some historians argue that this newfound fame was a double-edged sword. By advertising his empire's unimaginable wealth so flamboyantly, did Musa also paint a target on its back? The stories of a land where gold was as common as dust were intoxicating. While they attracted scholars and merchants, they also attracted the attention of rival states and ambitious warlords. In the centuries that followed, the Mali Empire would face increasing external pressures, from Tuareg raiders in the north to the rising Songhai Kingdom in the east. Did Musa's legendary journey, the very act that defined the empire's golden age, also sow the seeds of its eventual decline? It's a classic big-picture debate. Was the fame a protective shield of prestige or a dangerous beacon for predators? For now, these dangers seem far off. You are living in a time of peace, prosperity, and immense cultural pride. You can walk through the streets of Niamey or the bustling new districts of Timbuktu and see the tangible results of the journey. You see a mosque built with techniques from Andalusia. You can buy a book copied by a scholar educated in Cairo. And you can listen to a griot sing about your emperor's journey to the holy city. The world has come to Mali, and Mali has confidently taken its place in the world. The journey is over, but its impact is just beginning to unfold. The stories you heard on the merchant grapevine about the empire's new international fame were not an exaggeration. A few years after your return, you see tangible proof of it. A visiting merchant from across the sea, perhaps from Venice or Genoa, brings with him a strange and precious object, a new map of the known world, drawn by European cartographers. And on it, for the first time, is your home. You gather with others to look at it. It's a beautifully illustrated parchment, a marvel of color and calligraphy. Much of it is fantastical, with strange beasts drawn in the unexplored oceans. But there, covering a vast portion of West Africa, is the name Mali. And seated in the middle of it is a drawing of a king on a throne. He is wearing a crown, and in his hand he holds aloft a massive, shining nugget of gold. The caption, written in Latin, identifies him as Rex Mel, the king of Mali, the richest and noblest king of all this land. This is the famous Catalan Atlas of 1375, a masterpiece of medieval cartography. And that image of Mansa Musa, or a generalized king of Mali inspired by his legend, would become the definitive European image of West African royalty for centuries. This map is the mainstream historical proof of how Musa's journey literally put his empire on the world stage. Before him, European maps of Africa trailed off into a vague, unknown territory labeled HIC Sunt Drac Ones Here Be Dragons. After him, it was the land of the Golden King. Seeing yourself on a map made by strangers from a distant continent is a bizarre and profound experience. It's a reflection of your own existence seen through a distorted mirror. It validates your importance but also simplifies your identity down to a single commodity: gold. This new visibility brings a trickle, and then a steady stream of new visitors. They are not like the scholars Musa recruited. They are adventurers, mercenaries, and envoys from distant sultans and kings, all drawn by the siren song of gold. This influx leads to some strange cultural misunderstandings. You learn of a peculiar belief that becomes common among some of the foreign visitors, a weird piece of folklore about the gold itself. They believe the gold in Mali grows on plants. They have heard stories of the bamboo cayenne boar gold fields, where nuggets are found in the alluvial soil near riverbeds, often tangled in the roots of plants. This has been twisted into a literal belief that there are gold plants that you can harvest. Local merchants find this endlessly amusing and do little to discourage the myth, as it often makes the foreigners easier to swindle. The appearance of Mali on European maps, and the reasons for it, touch upon a fascinating historical debate. What was the primary driver of European interest in Africa during this period? Was it a quest for souls, the mythical Christian kingdom of Prester John, a desire for geographic knowledge, or pure, unadulterated lust for gold. The traditional narrative often emphasized a mixture of religious and scientific motives, but the Catalan Atlas tells a different story. The most prominent, detailed, and enticing feature of its depiction of West Africa is the king holding the gold nugget. This suggests to many modern historians that the economic motive was overwhelmingly dominant. The pilgrimage of Mansa Musa effectively acted as the greatest advertisement in history, confirming for resource-hungry European powers that Africa was not just a mysterious landmass to be circumnavigated on the way to India, but a source of immense, accessible wealth. His journey, therefore, may have played a direct role in stimulating the age of exploration, shifting the focus from finding a route around Africa to finding a way into it. It was no longer about dragons. It was about dividends. For you, living in the empire, this newfound fame is a source of immense pride. You were there. You were a part of the procession that inspired these maps and stories. When you see the awe on a foreign merchant's face as he trades for gold dust in the market, you feel a sense of vindication. The world now knows who you are, but there's a subtle, creeping unease that comes with this fame. The questions from the visitors are always about the gold. Where are the mines? How deep do they go? How much is there? Their interest is not in your culture, your history, or your faith, but in your resources. The image of the Golden King on the map is a powerful symbol, but it's also a reductive one. It flattens a complex, vibrant civilization into a caricature of wealth. You can't help but wonder if being known is entirely a good thing, especially when you are known for having something that everybody else wants. The map has given you a place in the world, but it has also defined that place in a way that you cannot control. The years continue to pass. The golden age that followed the pilgrimage has become the new normal. The grand mosques of Timbuktu are no longer construction sites, but established centers of daily life and prayer. The Sankore University is filled with students, its libraries overflowing with precious books. The empire feels stable, prosperous, and secure in its identity. But fame, as you've begun to suspect, has a price. The trickle of curious visitors has changed in character. It's no longer just merchants, scholars. You start seeing more envoys from North African sultanates. Their retinue is filled with men who look more like spies than diplomats. You hear rumors of Twa clans to the north who once traded peacefully for the empire's gold, now uniting under more aggressive leaders, their eyes fixed on the wealth of the cities they once served. The reputation of Mali's infinite wealth, meant to project strength, is now acting as a magnet for ambition and envy. The mainstream historical trajectory of the Mali Empire after Mansa Musa shows this clearly. While his reign represented the apex of its power and influence, the decades that followed were marked by increasing internal strife and external threats. His successors, like his son Meg and I, lacked his vision and political skill. The carefully balanced structure of the empire began to show cracks. This is the double-edged sword of Musa's legacy. He built an international reputation, but he also created a legend that was impossible for his heirs to live up to. He had performed a spectacular feat of statecraft and branding, but in doing so he had raised expectations both internal and external to an unsustainable level. You experience this shift in a very personal way. You see it in the increased security on the streets of the capital. You notice more soldiers on the payroll, more resources being diverted from cultural projects to military defense. You also see a strange and paranoid trend emerging at court, the rise of the official food taster. Of course, powerful rulers have always been wary of poison, but now it seems to become an obsession. Before any meal is served to the man's successor, a designated servant must publicly eat a portion of every dish. This practice, while grimly pragmatic, is a symptom of a deeper anxiety. The court no longer feels as secure as it once did. The threats are perceived as being closer, more intimate. This period of gentle decline raises one of the most fundamental questions in the study of history, a debate that applies to every great empire from Rome to Britain. Do empires collapse because of external pressures or internal decay? Applying this to Mali, one school of thought points to the external factors. They argue that the empire was simply overwhelmed by forces it could not control. The aggressive expansion of the Mossi kingdoms to the south, the constant raiding by the Tuareg in the north, and, most significantly, the rise of the rival Songhai Empire based in Gao. From this perspective, Mali was a victim of a changing geopolitical landscape. Its decline was inevitable as new, more aggressive powers rounded. However, another school of thought argues that the external threats were only successful because the empire was already rotting from within. They point to the series of weakened, ineffectual rulers who followed Musa. There were succession crises, court intrigues, and civil wars between different branches of the royal family. The vast empire, which required a strong, centralized hand to govern, began to break apart as regional governors asserted their own independence. In this view, the Songhai Tuar did not topple a mighty empire. They simply kicked in the door of a house that was already collapsing. The most likely answer, as is often the case in history, is a combination of both. The internal weakness invited external aggression, and the external aggression exacerbated the internal weakness. Mansa Musa's reign was the moment of perfect equilibrium, when a strong, visionary ruler could harness the empire's wealth to project power and culture. Once that central figure was gone, the delicate balance was lost. You are now an old man or woman. You have lived through the greatest period of your empire's history. You remember the excitement of the preparations for the great pilgrimage. You can still feel the heat of the Sahara, see the splendor of Cairo, and recall the profound emotion of standing before the Kaaba. You have seen your home transform from a powerful but little-known kingdom into a legendary land of gold and learning. And now, in your twilight years, you see the shadows beginning to lengthen. The stories of the great journey are still told, but they are tinged with a new nostalgia, a sense of a glorious past that the troubled present cannot quite match. The golden age has passed, and you are left with the quiet, bittersweet pride of having been there to witness it. You sit in the shade of a bustling marketplace, perhaps in Mianai or the now famous Embark too. The sounds are familiar, but you are not the same person who left on that grand journey all those years ago. You are older. Your memory a rich tapestry woven with threads of gold, sand, and faith. You have become a keeper of the story. Younger generations who only know the pilgrimage as a legend come to you to hear what it was really like. When they ask you who was he, who was Mansa Musa, really, the question is harder to answer than they think. He has become a myth, a symbol, but you remember the man, and you find yourself reflecting on the many different facets of his character, trying to reconcile the figure of legend with the person you observed. Was he a pious pilgrim? Absolutely. This is the most straightforward interpretation of his life's great event. You remember the look on his face in Mecca, the genuine, overwhelming devotion as he circled the Kaaba. You recall the trail of mosques he built across the continent. His faith was not for show. It was the core of his being. His journey was, first and foremost, a sincere act of religious piety. That much is clear. Was he a ridiculously extravagant show-off, a nouveau rich king determined to flaunt his wealth? There is no denying this aspect of his character. You were there in Cairo. You saw the indiscriminate, almost reckless, flood of gold he unleashed. The image of the 500 servants, each carrying a staff of pure gold just to announce his presence, is seared into your memory. It was a display of wealth so profound, so over the top, that it bordered on the absurd. He was just rich. He wanted the entire world to know just how rich he was. Was he a shrewd and visionary nation builder? The evidence is all around you. You can look up and see the Jing-Yui Rubber Mosque, a testament to his ambition. The scholars and libraries of Timbuktu are his living legacy. He didn't just spend his gold on fleeting luxuries. He invested it in the cultural and intellectual infrastructure of his empire. He returned from his journey not just with stories, but with the people and ideas needed to elevate his kingdom to a new level of sophistication. This was the act of a statesman with a long-term vision. During one of these storytelling sessions, a young person asks a peculiar question that makes you smile. Is it true that the Mansa had a special bird that would speak prophecies to him? This is a strange piece of folklore that has attached itself to his legend in the intervening years. It's a fun, little-known myth. The story goes that he had a spirit bird that would whisper secrets of the future and warnings of danger. Of course, it's not true, but it speaks to how his persona has grown beyond that of a mere king into a figure of folklore, imbued with magical qualities. You chuckle and tell them the truth, but the story shows how he's real, documented deeds were so fantastic that people found it easy to believe in even more fantastic tales about him. This multifaceted nature of his character is the subject of a deep and ongoing historical debate. How should history remember Mansa Musa? Different historians, emphasizing different aspects of his story, paint vastly different portraits. Some economic historians focus almost exclusively on the Cairo incident, portraying him as a somewhat naive, if powerful, figure whose actions caused massive, unintended economic consequences. They see him as a case study in the disruptive power of inflation. Other historians, focusing on the cultural flourishing that followed the pilgrimage, see him as one of the great patrons and nation builders of African history. They emphasize the founding of the Timbuktu libraries and the architectural legacy of Alsace, arguing that these are his true, lasting achievements. A more cynical school of thought, focusing on diplomacy and power, might view him as a master of propaganda. In this view, the entire pilgrimage was an incredibly expensive, but brilliantly successful public relations campaign. The piety, the generosity, the recruitment of scholars, it was all part of a calculated strategy to build soft power and announce the Mali Empire as a major player on the world stage. So who was he? A pious man who happened to be rich. A rich man who used piety as a tool. A visionary leader who understood the power of both wealth and faith. The truth is, he was all of these things at once. He was a complex, contradictory figure who operated on multiple levels simultaneously. He could be genuinely devout and performatively extravagant in the same act. He could be a shrewd political operator and a true believer. You look at the young, eager faces around you, and you realize you cannot give them a simple answer. The best you can do is tell the story as you remember it, the dust, the gold, the prayers, the chaos. You tell them that Mansa Musa was a man who contained multitudes, and you let them draw their own conclusions, just as the historians have been doing ever since. The sun feels a little lower in the sky these days, its light softer, more golden. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the Empire's peak has mellowed into something quieter, more reflective. You find yourself spending more time thinking about the past, not with regret, but with a sense of wonder that you were a part of it all. The great journey feels less like a single event and more like the central current of your entire life. You sit in the grand courtyard of the Jingyui Rebbe Mosque in Timbuktu, a place that didn't exist in its current form when you were young. The very stones around you are a testament to the legacy of the pilgrim. You watch students crossing the courtyard, their arms full of books, and you remember the scholars who made the long journey back with you from Cairo, their faces a mixture of apprehension and excitement. You see their legacy in the generations of thinkers they have trained. The gold trade continues, but it's different now. The roots are more established, but also more dangerous. The stories of the man's wealth, which once inspired awe, now often inspire greed. The empire's borders are slowly, almost imperceptibly, shrinking. A town that once paid tribute to the Mansa might now be under the control of a Tuareg chieftain or a Songhai general. The golden dream is still alive, but its edges are fraying. The mainstream historical narrative confirms this gentle, protracted decline. The Mali Empire didn't collapse in a single fiery event. It slowly ceded territory and influence over the course of more than a century. The central authority weakened, and the vassal states that made up the empire began to break away. The final blow came in the following centuries with the rise of the Songhai Empire, which would come to dominate the region, absorbing Timbuktu and Gao, the very cities that Mali had made famous. In your quiet reflections, you ponder a strange and esoteric question, a piece of what-if history that scholars sometimes discuss. What if Mansa Musa had never taken his pilgrimage? What if he had stayed home, hoarding his gold and quietly ruling his empire? Would Mali have remained a powerful but anonymous kingdom, safe in its obscurity? Would it have avoided the envy and attention that ultimately contributed to its downfall? It's a question without an answer. His journey was the empire's greatest triumph and perhaps the beginning of its long, slow unraveling. By reaching for a place in the world, he may have sacrificed the isolation that protected him. This touches upon a broader debate that historians have about the nature of historical legacies. Is a leader's legacy defined by the peak of their achievement or by the long-term consequences of their actions? If we judge Musa by the state of the empire at the end of his reign, he is an unparalleled success. He left Mali more famous, more cultured, and more influential than it had ever been. But if we judge him by the state of the empire a century later, his legacy becomes more complicated. Did he build a sustainable model for greatness, or did he create a brilliant but fleeting moment of glory that burned so brightly it consumed itself? You close your eyes and the memories wash over you. The shimmering heat of the Sahara, the overwhelming sensories of Cairo, the solemnity of Mecca, the taste of gritty water from a desert well, the weight of a small pouch of gold dust in your hand. These are not abstract historical facts for you. They are your life. You think about the concept of wealth. You left Mali, a land where gold was the measure of all things. You went to Cairo and saw that pouring too much gold into a system could break it. You learned that a man could own all the gold in the world and still need to borrow money. You returned home and saw that same gold transformed into something far more lasting: mosques, books, and knowledge. You have come to understand that true wealth is not a thing you can hold, but something that can be built, shared, and passed down through generations. The call to prayer echoes from the minaret above you, the voice of the muezzin calling the faithful. It's a sound you heard your whole life, but it carries a new resonance now. It connects you to that larger world you experienced, to the muezziness of Cairo and the holy mosques of Mecca. Your world is bigger than it was before, and that, you realize, might be the most enduring legacy of all. Not the gold, not the fame, but the connection. The journey opened a window between West Africa and the rest of the world, a window that, despite the conflicts and the changing of empires, would never truly be closed again. You sit in the shade of a bustling marketplace, perhaps in Mianai or the now famous Timbuktu. The sounds are familiar, but you are not the same person who left on that grand journey all those years ago. You are older, your memory a rich tapestry woven with threads of gold, sand, and faith. You have become a keeper of the story. Younger generations, who only know the pilgrimage as a legend, come to you to hear what it was really like. When they ask you who was he, who was Mansa Musa really, the question is harder to answer than they think. He has become a myth, a symbol, but you remember the man, and you find yourself reflecting on the many different facets of his character, trying to reconcile the figure of legend with the person you observed. Was he a pious pilgrim? Absolutely. This is the most straightforward interpretation of his life's great event. You remember the look on his face in Mecca, the genuine, overwhelming devotion as he circled the Kaaba. You recall the trail of mosques he built across the continent. His faith was not for show. It was the core of his being. His journey was, first and foremost, a sincere act of religious piety. That much is clear. Was he a ridiculously extravagant show-off? A nouveau rich king determined to flaunt his wealth? There is no denying this aspect of his character. You were there in Cairo. You saw the indiscriminate, almost reckless, flood of gold he unleashed. The image of the 500 servants, each carrying a staff of pure gold just to announce his presence, is seared into your memory. It was a display of wealth so profound, so over the top, that it bordered on the absurd. He was just rich. He wanted the entire world to know just how rich he was. Was he a shrewd and visionary nation builder? The evidence is all around you. You can look up and see the Jingyui River Mosque, a testament to his ambition. The scholars and libraries of Timbuktu are his living legacy. He didn't just spend his gold on fleeting luxuries. He invested it in the cultural and intellectual infrastructure of his empire. He returned from his journey not just with stories, but with the people and ideas needed to elevate his kingdom to a new level of sophistication. This was the act of a statesman with a long-term vision. During one of these storytelling sessions, a young person asks a peculiar question that makes you smile. Is it true that the Mansa had a special bird that would speak prophecies to him? This is a strange piece of folklore that has attached itself to his legend in the intervening years. It's a fun, little-known myth. The story goes that he had a spirit bird that would whisper secrets of the future and warnings of danger. Of course, it's not true. but it speaks to how his persona has grown beyond that of a mere king into a figure of folklore, imbued with magical qualities. You chuckle and tell them the truth, but the story shows how his real, documented deeds were so fantastic that people found it easy to believe in even more fantastic tales about him. This multifaceted nature of his character is the subject of a deep and ongoing historical debate. How should history remember Mansa Musa? Different historians, emphasizing different aspects of his story, paint vastly different portraits. Some economic historians focus almost exclusively on the Cairo incident, portraying him as a somewhat naive, if powerful, figure whose actions caused massive, unintended economic consequences. They see him as a case study in the disruptive power of inflation. Other historians, focusing on the cultural flourishing that followed the pilgrimage, see him as one of the great patrons and nation builders of African history. They emphasize the founding of the Timbuktu libraries and the architectural legacy of Al-Seychelles, arguing that these are his true, lasting achievements. A more cynical school of thought, focusing on diplomacy and power, might view him as a master of propaganda. In this view, the entire pilgrimage was an incredibly expensive but brilliantly successful public relations campaign. The piety, the generosity, the recruitment of scholars, it was all part of a calculated strategy to build soft power and announce the Mali Empire as a major player on the world stage. So who was he? A pious man who happened to be rich. A rich man who used piety as a tool. A visionary leader who understood the power of both wealth and faith. The truth is, he was all of these things at once. He was a complex, contradictory figure who operated on multiple levels simultaneously. He could be genuinely devout and perform a tithely extravagant in the same act. He could be a shrewd political operator and a true believer. You look at the young, eager faces around you, and you realize you cannot give them a simple answer. The best you can do is tell the story as you remember it: the dust, the gold, the prayers, the chaos. You tell them that Mansa Musa was a man who contained multitudes, and you let them draw their own conclusions, just as the historians have been doing ever since. Your own journey is drawing to a close. The memories of the great pilgrimage no longer feel like sharp, distinct events, but more like a watercolor painting. The colors bled together into a single, beautiful impression. The gold, the sand, the heat, the prayers, it's all one story now, the story of your life. You have outlived the Mansa, his children, and even the peak of the empire he built. You are a relic, a living whisper from a time of legends. You sometimes wonder what happened to all that gold. The mainstream historical truth is that it was absorbed into the world's economy. The gold you saw spent in Cairo, the gold you carried home, the gold that was mined for decades after it flowed north and east. It was melted down by Venetian and Genoese merchants, reminted into ducats and florins. It may have funded a part of the European Renaissance, building cathedrals and commissioning artworks by men who had never heard the name Mansa Musa. A piece of that gold which you once saw glittering in the African sun might now be part of a king's crown in a cold, distant land, its origin story completely erased. And what of the empire itself? Its fate was much the same. It was absorbed by time, its territories carved up by hungrier, more aggressive powers. The great Mali Empire, whose name was spoken with awe from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, now exists only in the songs of the griots and the memories of old men like you. The golden dream, like a desert mirage, has faded, but something else endured, something quieter, but far more resilient than gold or political power. The books, the knowledge. In the centuries that followed, as cities were conquered and dynasties fell, the precious manuscripts of Timbuktu were not all burned. This is the quiet, miraculous epilogue to the story. Families of scholars and librarians, understanding their true value, hid them. They were walled up in the back rooms of mosques, buried in chests under the desert sand, and passed down from generation to generation as the most sacred of heirlooms. While the empire of gold crumbled, an empire of words went into hiding, waiting for a future time when it could be rediscovered. This leads to the final, and perhaps most important, debate that historians have about Mansa Musa's legacy. What is the true measure of an empire? Is it its political boundaries, its military might, its economic output? Or is it the knowledge it creates and preserves? One perspective argues that the political empire was the reality, and its fall was the end of the story. The cultural achievements were a beautiful but temporary byproduct of a power that ultimately failed to sustain itself. But another, more enduring view is that the gold was just the fuel, and the empire was just the vessel. The real product of the Golden Age was the intellectual flowering in Timbuktu. In this view, Mansa Musa's greatest achievement was not in spending his wealth, but in successfully converting it into a more permanent form knowledge. The fact that thousands of those manuscripts survive to this day, while the gold is scattered and anonymous, gives powerful support to this argument. You are tired now. The sun has set, and the cool desert air settles over the city. The stories are all told. Your part in the great procession is over. You were a witness to the journey of a lifetime, a journey that defined an era. You saw a king of gold learn what true wealth was. You saw a pilgrimage of faith build a legacy of knowledge, and that is a story worth telling. That is a memory worth fading into. As sleep finally comes, it feels like the end of a long, long road. You are going home. The soft glow from your screen is fading now, just as the golden dream of Mali faded into the pages of history. The journey is over. You can feel the weight of your own travels today, the gentle pull of sleep. The Sahara's winds have quieted, leaving only the soft hum of the fan in your room. The river of gold has slowed, becoming a gentle, drifting current, ready to carry you into your own dreams. Think of the quiet resilience of those hidden manuscripts, sleeping under the sand for centuries waiting. That same patient stillness is available to you now. There are no more markets to see, no more deserts to cross. There is only the soft darkness, the comfort of your bed, and the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Let the stories dissolve. Let the names and the dates and the details melt away, leaving only the feeling of a long and satisfying journey now come to its peaceful end. The dust is settled, the caravan is at rest, and you, fellow traveler, have arrived at your destination for the night. Let the quiet close in, let the stillness hold you. Sleep now,